What awaits us beyond the threshold of life? This question has preoccupied humanity for centuries, giving rise to myths, religions, and philosophical concepts. But what if there was someone who glimpsed this mystery and returned to tell us about it? In 1944, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, a man who dedicated his life to exploring the depths of the human psyche, experienced something that forever changed his understanding of life and death. This was not a religious revelation or an esoteric vision. It was a personal experience, lived by a scientist who always approached questions of the mind with scientific rigor. That year, Jung suffered a severe heart attack. On the brink of life and death, he experienced something incredible. His consciousness left his body. "I had the feeling that everything was being sloughed away," he later recalled. "Everything I aimed at, wanted, or thought, the whole phantasmagoria of earthly existence fell away or was torn from me." He described floating above his body, watching the doctors trying to save his life. But this was only the beginning. Soon, he found himself in a boundless space, which he called the void of creation. There were no sounds, no light, but he possessed comprehensive knowledge. Thoughts came not as words, but as instant understanding. In this void he encountered other consciousnesses, other souls. He felt that he knew them, and they knew him. It was like being in a sphere of total knowledge, total understanding, Jung wrote, admitting that human language is powerless to describe this experience. What did he see in this void? What secrets of the afterlife were revealed to him? In this altered state of consciousness, Carl Jung experienced what he later called the panorama of life. The soul undergoes a thorough analysis, not in the form of judgment or punishment, but rather as an all-encompassing recollection. It is like watching a movie, but the viewer feels not only their own emotions, but also the emotions of all those who have ever been affected by their words, actions, or even silence. "I saw my life as a single whole," he said. "There were no secrets from me. I was what I had done. I was the embodiment of my life." And at that moment comes the realization of one's true essence. But this is only the starting point. After this out-of-body experience, it took Jung time to return to his usual state. He described the sensation as awakening not from an ordinary dream, but from another reality, clearer and deeper than our everyday life, as if returning not to a world, but to a shell, to a limitation. He often repeated, "The real life is not here. We are merely guests, travelers, students." And this is not just a beautiful metaphor, because in his near-death experience he not only left his body, he saw what awaits us in the future. He described spaces resembling cities of light, different levels and layers. Some were calm, like the still surface of an evening lake, while others were teeming with the energy of change. And each soul found its place according to its vibrations, its inner light. "You don't go to heaven or hell," Jung explained in a small circle of his closest students. "You simply end up where you already are, without masks or pretenses, without a name." Carl Jung, a profound researcher of the human psyche, concluded that the soul is the repository not of the actions themselves, but of their quintessence, not of external activity, but of inner intention. A person who has chosen the path of deceit feels it as a burden, while a life filled with love gives a sense of flight. However, this is not a final verdict, but rather an invitation to personal growth, awareness, and a return to the true self. Jung spoke of souls voluntarily choosing to return to the world to re-experience the full spectrum of human emotions, pain and joy, fear and faith. This choice is driven not by external compulsion, but by an inner desire for self-improvement, to deepen and enrich one's spiritual experience. Once, describing the soul preparing to incarnate, Jung drew an analogy not with a film, but with a symphony, a grand flow of energy, light and meaning, focusing on one point in a human being. This image allowed him to realize that we are not accidents or mistakes, but the result of a conscious choice. You come here because there is something within you that only earthly experience can reveal, he asserted. And in this lies the key point. There was not a trace of pathos or pressure in these revelations. Jung did not call for blind faith, but rather suggested remembering what is already embedded in the depths of our memory. His words resonated in the hearts of listeners because he did not teach, but reminded. At times, after discussing these profound experiences, Jung could not hold back tears, caused not by fear, but by a sense of connection with a reality so far exceeding ordinary life that it seemed like a dream. He confessed that the hardest thing was not being there, but returning to the world and continuing life as if you knew nothing, when in fact you possessed knowledge. In his innermost notes, Carl Jung reflected on the nature of human existence and asserted that awareness of one's true essence dispels the fear of death, which is not an end, but a gateway to a new, more authentic reality. A natural question arises: what did the celebrated scientist see beyond the ordinary? In his profound research, Jung attempted to describe not only the afterlife, but also the very moment of the soul's transition from its corporeal shell. He envisioned this transition not as an abrupt break or a painful rupture, but as a long-awaited liberation, comparable to a relieved sigh after holding one's breath for a long time. In this moment, a complete transformation occurs. A person ceases to be limited by their body, but continues to exist in another capacity, retaining awareness, the ability to feel and perceive the world, but without distorting filters and suffering. At first, the soul contemplates its former body and the people around it, who seem detached and distant. Then, a warm light beckons, offering a sense of peace and tranquility. Jung asserted that at this moment the soul is not greeted by familiar angels or relatives, but by entities that defy verbal description due to the absence of a concrete form, yet possess a powerful presence. They cannot be seen, but one can feel their unconditional love, which requires no proof. This is a state of recognition, a return to the place where the soul has always resided, but temporarily forgotten. According to Jung, the key is not the meeting itself, but the moment of truth. There is no place for judgment or punishment there. The soul is shown its entire life, as on an open palm, but the emphasis is not on events, but on feelings, both one's own and those of others. Everything that a person has ever radiated into the world returns to them so that they can realize and understand. If they have caused someone pain, they will feel that pain not as retribution, but as a valuable lesson and an understanding of what the other person felt. Conversely, if they gave love, they will experience that feeling again in its purest and most amplified form, undistorted by words. It is not a higher power that asks questions about who a person was, but the person themselves, freed from fear and excuses, honestly answering themselves, did I become who I wanted to be? Sometimes, as Jung noted, souls experience fear and do not dare to move on. They remain attached to the earthly world, their loved ones and unfinished business, stuck in an intermediate space he called grey light. There is no fear there, but there is no peace either. It's like a corridor with no exit until the soul decides to move on or return. The events that unfolded afterward exceeded all expectations. Jung presented the concept of multi-level spheres, abodes of souls, where they go, based on the experience accumulated during life. At the same time, it was not about material wealth or social status, but about spiritual light, sincerity of intentions, and the ability to compassion, even in moments of emotional pain. It is important to note that each of these levels is not a specific location, but rather a state of consciousness, a certain vibration. The soul does not ascend to these levels, but rather remembers its true nature, and thus identifies with them. At this point, Jung's tone became subdued, as if he was about to share a secret knowledge that should not be spoken aloud. And yet, he uttered it. He spoke of the fact that beyond these levels lies silence. But this silence is not emptiness. It is like the breath of the universe itself. There are no forms, no names, no memories of past lives. There remains only the essence, the soul, in its pristine radiance. I cannot express it in words, Jung confessed to his trusted students. It is like returning to the source of all things, to the point where the individual and collective unconscious merge into one. However, in order to reach this state, it is necessary to go through a process of liberation. And it's not always easy. Even after death, people tend to cling to past grievances, unfulfilled desires, and an established image of themselves. Each such anchor becomes a burden that prevents the soul's ascension. Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, described a tragic picture of the wanderings of souls who find no peace after death. Some are tormented by the burden of unforgiveness, unable to reconcile themselves to their own mistakes or the grievances inflicted by the world. Others are tormented by the fear of oblivion, fearing that their earthly existence will be meaningless and traceless. In such moments of despair, some entities come to the rescue, acting not as saviors, but as encouraging guides. They gently remind lost souls of their true nature, that their potential is immeasurably greater than they realize, and that they are never left alone. Jung noted that despite all the hardships and deprivations of earthly life, many souls strive to return because once beyond the veil, they suddenly regain the memory of their true purpose. Life appears not as a source of suffering, but as a priceless gift, a chance for the manifestation of love, spiritual growth, and the restoration of lost memories. The soul returns to the earthly world, not to lead a miserable existence, but to unlock its true potential and become what it is destined to be. Jung witnessed souls carefully choosing their future lives, determining their parents, country, era, and even the trials they would face. This choice is not made from a position of victimhood, but from the perspective of a wise planner, consciously entering the stage of a cosmic drama of self-discovery. This is Jung's greatest revelation. Nothing in our lives is accidental, neither pain nor joy, neither meetings nor partings. All events that happen to us reflect the deep reasons that prompted us to come into this world, the lessons we seek to learn, and the memories we yearn to recover. As Jung himself said, a person is not just a body desperately seeking meaning, but the very meaning embodied in bodily form. Carl Gustav Jung spoke in parables, like an oracle guarding secret knowledge accessible only to the chosen few. There was a magnetic power in his words, touching the deepest chords of the human soul. In his opinion, the truth lay not in otherworldly revelations, but in the meaningfulness of earthly existence. There is no death, only a change of abode. The greatest difficulty is not in leaving life, but in finding one's true self, he asserted. It seemed as if Jung possessed a mystical compass, pointing the way not to the afterlife, but to the labyrinths of the human soul with its forks, dead ends, and oases of self-knowledge. He once uttered a phrase filled with the deepest meaning. The most terrible mental trauma is not physical death, but the loss of connection with one's true nature. Jung believed that most people lead a half-asleep existence, fearing to face the reality that will open to them after awakening. However, awakening is the ultimate goal of human incarnation. He was not attracted to religious dogmas, moral principles, or sensual pleasures. He spoke of fundamental things, of simple truths, urging, "Carry the light even if you are surrounded by darkness." Jung was convinced that the soul is invulnerable to loss. Even in mortal terror, even in a state of complete confusion, it will always be found. The light inevitably gravitates towards its spark, for every person is not a random creation of chaos, but an answer to an ancient prayer, the embodiment of a higher purpose. In one of his last works he wrote, "I saw a soul returning to the light, and its tears were tears not of pain, but of recognition. It cried, realizing how greatly it had underestimated itself in life, and how boundless love had surrounded it throughout its journey." Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, claimed that in every person's life there comes a turning point when the familiar reality seems to crack, through which a ray of light breaks through. At this moment, fate provides us with a unique opportunity to look behind the veil of everyday life and touch something greater. The main thing is not to panic and run away from this revelation, but to stop, listen to yourself and say, "I hear this call." If you have reached these lines, perhaps now is your turn. This is not an accident and not just a set of words on the screen. This may be a sign indicating that you are already standing on the threshold of returning to yourself, to your true essence. If, reading these words, you felt a response in the depths of your soul, even if barely perceptible, do not ignore it. After all, somewhere in the most secret part of our being, there is already knowledge about this. Within us echoes what Jung called the voice of the soul, a quiet but persistent call to self-knowledge and the attainment of wholeness. Share this revelation with those who may have also forgotten their purpose but are now ready to remember. Share this moment of truth with those who are looking for their way home. See you where words end and true reality begins, where the soul finds its voice, and where we can meet our true selves.